It's time for this week's RSPW Rewind. With Chris Jericho being in the news this week after losing his AEW title and drinking too much bubbly, I thought it would be appropriate to find some old Jericho threads. And in fact, I struck gold in a way. I found the oldest known mention of Chris Jericho on RSPW. I found a post from June 23rd, 1993. In a post authored by none other than Dave Scherer. Yes, the same Dave Scherer who now runs PW Insider, who was very active and was a frequent poster on RSPW back in the day. The title of the post has nothing to do with Chris Jericho. The title of the post was Brett Como, which is the name of another guy who wrestled. But here's what the post says. Brett was in town here in Vancouver about 2 months ago. He came down with Mike Lozansky from Calgary. Both were trained in Calgary and both are great workers. Mike works Mexico a fair amount, and Brett is a Puerto Rico and South America worker who is now becoming a regular. I have seen Lozansky work Mexico as the Tigre Canadiens quite a few times and was not overly impressed. Chris Jericho, on the other hand, has a ton of potential. Yeah, you know what? I agree. I think that Jericho guy, he might be able to make a nice little career for himself. I think Dave may be onto something here. But that is the oldest mention that I could find of Chris Jericho on RSPW. And it goes all the way back to June of 1993. So now we're going to skip ahead a little bit. There's a few other Jericho-related posts that I thought were interesting to bring up. This one from April 30th. Of 1999. This was months before he debuted in WWE. Headline, So is Chris Jericho coming to WWF or not? By Stone Gollum. Not to be confused with Gollum from Lord of the Rings. See, I got my reference, my nerd reference right this week. People jumped all over me. I confused Star Trek with Star Wars when I was talking about Cody and Brandy and their costumes at All Out. I know the difference between Star Wars and Star Trek. You just misspeak once, and that whole community just jumps all over you. I'm a nerd too. I'm a wrestling nerd. I'm not as much of a sci-fi nerd. I'm a wrestling nerd. But even I know Gollum is from Lord of the Rings. Anyway, Stone Gollum. I hear one rumor that Chris Jericho has re-signed with WCW, and I am seeing all of these Jericho signs in the WWF audiences. So who's right? Has he even decided? Yes, there was a lot of confusion at this point in the spring, it would have been, of 99, whether or not Jericho was going to make the jump. He had been getting jobbed out, because it had been believed that he just refused to sign a new contract with WCW. And in his mind, he was going to just let his contract lapse and then go work for Vince McMahon. He was just biding his time. So people were asking a lot of questions like this back then. Is he or isn't he? Will he or won't he? I remember Vince McMahon, and I actually didn't even think to search for this, but I vaguely remember around this time, it might have been maybe late 98, Vince McMahon was invited to actually give a talk or a lecture at Oxford. I don't think I dreamt this. Pretty sure this really happened. He was invited to give a talk or a speech or whatever at Oxford, and when it was opened up to questions, he got a question from somebody as to whether or not Chris Jericho was going to be coming to the WWF, or was he going to go after Chris Jericho to bring him to the WWF? And I forgot what Vince said. He gave some kind of non-answer answer. But it just goes to show you there were a lot of people really excited at the time about the prospect of Jericho coming over to the company. And I know that because I was one of those people who was hoping he would make the jump. Then we go to Danger 3210, who responded to Stone Gollum. Jericho hasn't signed a contract yet. Rumor is, though, that he is demanding WCW pay him $1 million. And a main event, I don't know why I said that like, was it Dr. Evil, right? Was that who it was? Dr. Evil from the whatchamacallit films. The the Steve Austin, Austin Powers, Jesus Christ. The Austin Powers movie. $1 million is what Chris Jericho. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. So anyway, Danger says, He's demanding $1 million supposedly in a main event push, or he is heading north to the WWF. Will WCW give him all of that when they have so many main eventers as it is? I don't know. I don't remember that rumor about him demanding $1 million to stay in WCW. It's possible. You know, maybe he got that from one of the newsletters at the time. That was actually the first I read of something like that. And then there's this. From I assume lady, but you never know, it's the internet. Somebody calling themselves Jerichoholic Girl. As far as WCW goes, if they're smart, they'll give him the $1 million. Rumor is they already offered him $900,000, so what's the big deal about the extra $100,000? And Jericho deserves a world title shot. He's a great wrestler, has a ton of fans for someone who is considered a mid-carder. What WCW should have done was actually give him a title shot against Goldberg, back when that whole thing was going on. Personally, really wanted Jericho to be the one to win the World War III Battle Royal, but of course he never had a chance. How about if WCW gives Chris Jericho a shot against DDP for the world title when he returns to the ring? That is, if Nash doesn't take the belt at Slamboree. Personally, I feel Jericho is more deserving of the title than both DDP and Kevin Nash combined. Hands down, he is one of the greatest and most intriguing young stars in wrestling today. Oh, well, this definitely Jerichoholic Girl here trying to get in with Chris Jericho. Coming from Jerichoholic Girl, though, I don't get the sense that she is being entirely unbiased in that opinion. But now we get closer to Jericho's WWF debut. This post is from June 21st, 1999, which would have been just before the Millennium Countdown first appeared on WWE television. This post is titled, Must Read, a great article regarding Chris Jericho's future. This was an article that somebody shared on the RSPW forum, written by Bob Ryder at the time, who was running the website OneWrestling.com, and I think he may have also been working for WCW or WCW Online. He went on to work for TNA, and I have no idea if he's still with Impact or not, but he wrote an article titled, Why Chris Jericho Should Stay in WCW. And I'm not going to read the whole article, but I'll read the key parts to you. On July 27th, Chris Jericho becomes the hottest free agent in recent wrestling history. Speculation has run rampant in recent weeks and months that he will leave World Championship Wrestling and sign with the World Wrestling Federation. I hope that doesn't happen. I don't think it should. Chris Jericho should stay in WCW. I realize that it isn't going to be an easy decision for him to make, and I know it will be an emotional one for him regardless of what he decides to do, but when you weigh all the factors involved, I think it makes more sense for him to stay. For one, WCW needs him. A lot has changed in the last few months. When Jericho first started thinking about leaving, the landscape of wrestling was very different. Monday nights were still very competitive, and WCW was in a much stronger position than it is today. While Jericho has been on the sidelines recovering from an injury, and more recently not being used because of the uncertainty of his future, the ratings gap has widened. Jericho's star power could have made a difference in recent months and still can in the future. Time is on his side. Let's face facts. The upper echelon of talent in WCW is going to have to be phased out over the course of the next year or two. And younger talent will have to fill those spots. Ric Flair, Randy Savage, Roddy Piper, Hollywood Hogan. They're all near the end of their tremendously successful careers. It's easy to say that you can just elevate young talent, but it won't be easy to fill those shoes. It will take special talent. Chris Jericho is a special talent. He's got a good 10 to 15 years ahead of him as a top star in this business. Well, hey, here we are 20 years later, and he's the first AEW champion. I guess Ryder, he undersold Jericho's time in the business. At least as a top star. There are no guarantees, he says, that Chris would be turned into a star in WWF. It's often said that Vince McMahon is a genius when it comes to making stars, but his track record is mixed. For every Undertaker, there's a Vader. For every Rock, there's a Mark Merrow. That's certainly not meant to slight Vader or Romero, but neither man was a success in WWF as they had been in WCW. Paul White has only been in WWF for a few months, so it's still too early to tell how he will progress, but the initial results have been disappointing. Chris Jericho is already a star, he says, in WCW. And last but not least here, positioning. In WWE, Chris would be, or WWF, there was no WWE, Chris would be jockeying for a position as a main eventer with younger talent that will be just as protective of their turf as any of the current WCW main eventers have been. Given the option of competing for a spot as a main eventer against Austin, Rock, Helmsley, Mankind, Undertaker, or Paul White, or staying with WCW at a time when the established names are in transition, it seems to make more sense for him to stay with WCW. Therefore, he says at the end here, Chris Jericho should stay with WCW. Let's be honest here. Not even Chris Jericho could have saved the dumpster fire that WCW would go on to become, and was already becoming at that point. I think he made the right decision, don't you? Don't you think he made the right decision? He came to WWE at a time when his stock had never been higher. Who knows where on the card he would have been by the time WCW died in 2001, had he stuck around until the bitter end. Who knows where he would have ended up? He probably would have been okay. True talent rises to the top. They find a way. But thankfully for him, he didn't take life advice from Bob Ryder. We skip ahead to the night of his Raw debut. This is from August 9th, 1999, from GDR 82. Chris Jericho is a star. He is the future of the WWF. 2 seconds into his debut, and he is just as over as The Rock. Well, let's not get carried away here. This dude is the next WWF champ. He has it all. Quite possibly the best wrestler in the WWF. Mic skills. Him and Rock are very close to being number 1. Entrance and music. Wow, his entrance got the crowd pumped. The pyros were sweet. The music was great. Nice theme. I doubt his sucky band played it. I shouldn't laugh. It just, I forgot that Fozzy was still around back then, but, according to GDR, they were a sucky band, and he's very happy that they did not perform his theme music, apparently. Anyway, he says, this is better than Gangrel's entrance, so Jericho has a top claim in this category. Tons of charisma. He was more goofy in WCW, but now he's like a cool rock star. Kind of like an early Shawn Michaels, the future of the WWF. Well, he's not totally wrong. I wouldn't say sucky band. Although, Fozzy back then, I didn't even know Fozzy was a thing in 99, but Fozzy back then, they really were, I always thought it was just a joke. He was doing the whole Mongoose McQueen thing where he wouldn't admit that they were the same person. But over time, I have to say, they've had a few songs that I've really liked. Enemy and Judas. There's another one, I forgot the name of it. They're not a terrible band. They're not a bad band. And then this. This is just so perfect. We go from GDR 82, praising Chris Jericho's WWF debut in August. We go to September 18th, 1999. The one and only Ultimate SN posted this. Headline, Why the Feck Did WWF Have to Ruin Jericho? Well, that took all of 1 month. To go from that post to this one, this is a fickle bunch here. This is for RSPW to deem Jericho a failure 1 month in. That's saying a lot. Anyway, he says, and I'm shooting with this one, brah, because he was my favorite wrestler way before all of you Mark Lemmings jumped on the bandwagon. Right away, Vince shows that he doesn't know what to do with Lionheart. First, they copy a WCW angle, and a bad one at that, with the Fink. Then they stick him with this Hughes jabroni, who no one gives a shit about, that of, I assume, being Mr. Hughes. And that was very puzzling, by the way. That didn't last very long, Jericho and Mr. Hughes. That just was a total misfire on their part. He says, and the whole time having him run away from Shamcock, making him look like a pussy. In WCW, although Jericho had scams to get him out of matches or cheated to win, which a good heel should do, when the time came down to it that he had to fight, he would always step in the ring and kick some ass. Thanks, Vince. And there it is. Your weekly reminder that the fans have been bashing Vince McMahon for the last 20 years. And according to some, Chris Jericho was ruined a month into his WWF run. I'd say he rebounded pretty well. And now he's enjoying a little bit of the bubbly.